I would probably be remiss if in this discussion of religion I did not say at least something about religious conflicts. However, if we look at it and analyze it closely, what I think we're going to find in almost every single case going back throughout much of history, and especially today, is this, that while religion may very well play a major role in a conflict, nevertheless, there are almost always going to be multiple other factors involved. For example, economics, politics, race, ethnicity, access to transportation, access to resources and natural resources in general, money, and the people who are really kind of ginning up the conflict may very well not care all that much about religion. It's a matter of an exercise of power. But as we know, because people hold religion so close to their personhood, if you can get people to get excited about religion in a way that kind of puts them against another group, even if it's a similar religion, you can get them to do, let's face it, the worst of things in the name of a god or multiple gods. So let's take a look at it, but keep in mind that throughout history, in reality, there were probably many things going on. It wasn't just religion, but religion might have been used in ways to be able to, frankly, manipulate people. Okay, so this, of course, is our planet. Let's take a look at some current versions of conflicts. I think we know that if any one of us was going to throw a dart at the world and say, where is there religious conflict, we're probably going to throw it at the Middle East. And part of this has to do with the fact that, of course, the three great monotheistic religions are all centered there: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And even if by centered, I would say that Christianity largely has migrated out of the Middle East, nevertheless, its site of origination is there. And because of this, the people who live there have religion playing out in their lives on a daily basis. It's one of the places that you cannot help but walk around and not feel the impacts of religion, no matter what country you're in. So in the Middle East, let's face it, there are conflicts that have direct ties to religion, although there are many other things going on, from race and ethnicity, language, natural resources, of course, money, and power. So in the Middle East, what do we have? Probably the most obvious thing has to do with the Israelis, the Palestinians, and then the neighbors of the Israelis. Syria, for example, has a very contentious relationship with Israel, and as we now know, because Syria melted down beginning with the Arab Spring in 2011, has conflicts within itself also. In Iraq, of course, and in Yemen. Now, here's what's happening in a nutshell. Because obviously with Israel, you have this conflict between Judaism and Islam. And at the same time, there are people who live in Israel and who live in Palestine, the Palestinian territories, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, who are Christians as well. And because of this, it's slightly more complicated than just these two things. But, it has to do with people's land and access to land and whose land it is and whose land it was and all of that. And with regard to Syria, of course, mostly this is Muslims fighting each other, but you have variations on the theme of Islam because you have the Shia version and the Sunni version operating simultaneously against each other, and then a number of other things happening. Same thing in Iraq, and in Iraq you mix in larger Christian population. And then in Yemen, you have Shiites, and then this is a direct tie to Iran, which is overwhelmingly a Shiite country. And then in addition to that, you have the Saudis, who are Sunnis, and the Saudis are directly involved in Yemen. And so it's a very, very complicated thing, but you cannot really have all of this happening without the natural resources, without the access to land, without the access to power. Now, what are we looking at? Africa. So I've got an arrow pointing at Ethiopia and an arrow pointing at Nigeria, and the arrow pointing at Ethiopia is also really kind of looking at Sudan as well. So in Africa, there are more than these couple that I'm going to give you, but just giving you some examples. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia has a mixed population of both Christians and Muslims, and there's conflict between them. In Sudan and South Sudan is mostly Christian. Sudan is mostly Muslim. All of Sudan was one single country at one point, and then it broke up. And then after that, South Sudan has had multiple conflicts with itself because there's ethnic components to this and linguistic components. Sudan has something like 600 languages in it. So when you have that much complexity, there can be problems. And in Nigeria, also a country with a couple hundred languages in it, really in some version of languages or dialects of languages. But you have Muslims in the north, and you have Christians in the south, and you have animists there. So there's a huge mix, and there has been tension between the people who live in Nigeria really since 1960 when the country was founded. All right. I think obviously enough also South Asia, and then I have another arrow pointing at what that is calling Burma, which is Myanmar. So in Southern Asia, of course, there's the India-Pakistan conflict. Now, India may very well have the largest Muslim population in the world, but it is definitely a Hindu-oriented country because the overwhelming majority of people who live in India are Hindus. But of course, the population is 1.3 billion, so you have a lot of people to stick in there. And India, as I've gone through before, is a very complex religious landscape. Pakistan is a little bit less complicated, but traditionally the way people have seen this is India is a Hindu country and Pakistan is a Muslim country, and they are at direct conflict with each other. This is mostly over land and over resources, but we can play it out as if it's a religious conflict as well. Afghanistan. Well, honestly, I don't know. Does anyone know? In Afghanistan, there are these rare earth minerals. It is a transportation route. It is an opium-producing area, which makes heroin. So there are kind of a lot of things going on. I'm not sure that the Taliban exclusively is about religion. I think they have a lot to do with power as well. But religion probably plays out in Afghanistan in terms of fueling conflict in Afghanistan more than it does almost any place else in the world. Sri Lanka. Also, government was recently overthrown in Sri Lanka. It's a place where you have a couple of different religions that operate kind of against each other, with Buddhism there and Hinduism there and some other mixes of other things going on. Myanmar recently in the news because of the persecution of a Muslim minority by the Buddhist majority. So there you go. And some others. Back in the 1990s, there was a conflict in the Balkans with Yugoslavia. This was mostly between Orthodox Christians, Catholic Christians, and Muslims, sort of all mixed together in a soup when it was Yugoslavia. And then as it broke up, each one of these groups of people now was attempting to hold on to their own territory, and it resulted in a horrendous conflict. Northern Ireland, pretty famous. Northern Ireland is mostly or majority Protestant. The Republic of Ireland is majority Catholic. Now, we can say that what happens in Northern Ireland is related to religion, Catholics and Protestants. Nevertheless, this is a 850-year-long conflict. Before Protestantism existed, there was conflict going on there because England had conquered Ireland as a colonial possession, and from that point on, the Irish have fought the whole thing off. And at this point, Northern Ireland, Ulster, remains part of the United Kingdom, and then the rest of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is its own country. But without a question, even though these people are not overly religious there anymore, people identify as Catholic or Protestant, and as a result of that, you can mix the religion in, even though probably at this point it has much more to do with politics than anything else. American indigenous groups, who all had their own versions of religion, of course, and I mean all the way from the very northern parts of North America to the southern parts of South America. And in many cases, used religion, probably in most cases, used religion as a method of conflict against other groups. But again, this was access to resources and a number of other things, and power. And of course, in the Middle Ages and Renaissance Europe, there was the Holy Roman Empire and all of that. But Joseph Stalin, who was a dictator in the Soviet Union, famously said about the Pope, when the Pope didn't like the way communism was going and the persecution of people, religious people in Soviet Union, what we would now call Russia, Joseph Stalin famously said, "How many divisions does the Pope have?" In other words, the Pope doesn't have a military. What power does he have? So this is the thing with religion. Does religion really have power if it doesn't possess a military? And in this day and age, well, I don't know. In the past, of course, it did. And so on. So I think I've covered some of it. We could probably find more. But the point I want you to get out of this as much as anything else is that while sure, you can gin people up and get them very excited over religion, the conflict itself probably has many layers to it. And I think if you exclusively look at the religious character of a conflict, especially today in the modern world, you're probably missing quite a lot of what's really going on.